On the Jesuit University campus in San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, known as the UCA. In the early morning hours of November 16th, 1989, 6 Jesuit priests, including the rector of the university, Ignacio Ellacuría, and their housekeeper, Julia Elba Ramos, and her 15-year-old daughter, Selena, were woken up in the middle of the night, dragged out into the rose garden behind the Jesuit residence, and were shot to death by soldiers who had accused the Jesuits of being rebels or sympathetic to rebels and having sympathies for those who were opposed to the government junta. And in reality, what the Jesuits had been doing for their time at the UCA, it's helpful to put this event in some wider context. This isn't a random event that happened just one night. It was actually in the wake of more than 12 years of open calls by the government for the Jesuits to be killed, after countless death threats by mail, anonymous phone calls, and even anonymous letters to the editor in the newspaper. There were pamphlets in the streets that said, "Be a patriot, kill a priest." And the Jesuits were labeled and mischaracterized as dissenters, as people who weren't patriotic, as communists and Marxists, when in fact all they had been doing over the period of the 12-year-long civil war in El Salvador was call for dialogue and peace, and to protest the death of the 75,000 Salvadorans, most of whom were peasants, people only seeking peace and a way to provide for themselves and their families in the countryside of El Salvador. Simple people, people like you and me, moms and dads, brothers and sisters, farmers, laborers, students, killed by the government junta. And the Jesuits endured years of death threats. More than 15 bombs were placed on the UCA campus at various times, and 12 years before the Jesuits were killed in 1989. Bombs had destroyed the library, the printing press, the computer center, all intended to send the message that education at the UCA is dangerous and subversive. And when the Jesuits and their housekeeper and her daughter were killed, their brains were blown out to illustrate what happens to people who educate and empower. As tragic as this event is, it is also hailed as a turning point in this 12-year civil war in El Salvador, as international outcry and calls for investigations led to a negotiated settlement that led to the end of the civil war. So the Jesuits and their housekeeper, Julia Elba, and her daughter Selena did not die in vain. In fact, we recognize them as martyrs. The word martyr means a witness, and these are supreme witnesses of the costliness of Jesuit education. And even more, they are witnesses of faith, hope, and love. And we honor them to remember that in the end, faith, hope, and love win. Now, what does this mean for us as partners in Jesuit education, or as partners in mission for Jesuit education? I think first and foremost, it shows us the costliness of Jesuit education. We hear these phrases all the time, like reflection and discernment, to be women and men foreign with others, cure personalis, seeking God in all things, to be contemplatives in action, seeking solidarity and kinship. And we risk those words becoming jargon or window dressing unless we really consider the price that we have to pay to live up to those values. The UCA martyrs remind us of the costliness of these Jesuit values. They also reflect for us what this could look like, even though it's from another context and from 30 years ago, that we can consider what it means for us in a time of similar division, doubt, and distrust. A lot of people feeling isolated, a widespread suffering, and real concern about the future of our country, our church, the academy, and the world. What does it mean for us to be contemplatives in action, to practice these Jesuit values, to make a habit of attention, reverence, and devotion, and ask ourselves, to what or to whom do we pay attention? To what or to whom do we give our hearts? The UCA martyrs gave their hearts to the people of El Salvador, especially the poor, the people who were rendered socially insignificant, the non-persons, those who were fated to premature death, the people who had no voice, no agency, and no power. And for us today, in an American social context, university life comes with a lot of prestige and power. And we can be tempted to spend a lot of time and energy paying attention to measuring outcomes and maximizing profits and boosting our national standing and trying to make sure that we are preparing our graduates for impressive careers and great success. The UCA martyrs call us to different standards for Jesuit education. They call us to forming whole people, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, morally, who grow ever more aware of reality so that we can take responsibility for transforming it, so that it more fully reflects the demands of justice, that we stand up for human dignity and rights, that we seek not only our good as individuals or as a department or division or university, but the global common good, the good of all, with a preferential option, a preferential concern and commitment to the least, the lost, the lowly, the people who even today too often go unseen and unheard, who don't have equal access to resources or agency or social status, privilege or power. That we form our students so that they can be attentive to the suffering in the world and reflect within themselves and in conversation with others to think about how their passions, how their interests, and how their abilities prepare them to help solve urgent social problems, help heal the wounds in and around us.